I always get a little funny because I see in that presentation when we were actually meeting in person, and I'm like, wow, those were the days. I feel so much older now. It's like, yeah, remember in my day when we met in
That's 2 years
person?
ago now, right?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh man, well, welcome everybody. You see people coming into the room. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You're in the Brooklyn Aquarium Society's live presentation, live stream with the one and only, the best above the rest. Kingpin of the Marin.
Well, you've been thinking of this stuff for a while now, huh?
No,
Oh
I'm
man,
just
he's been
winging it.
working
I'm
on
just
this, huh?
winging it. I'm just winging it. But the one and only Ekus, which always gave a great presentation, always gives a great presentation for the Brooklyn Aquarium Society. We want to welcome him to our live stream and welcome you all as well. Steve Matassa, our wonderful club president, myself, D. Manuel, Dave, but all the other people that don't know me, Brooklyn Aquarium Society. So welcome everybody and happy Friday. We're going to be talking about water quality, and behind the scenes, we're just talking about water quality issue. It affects both freshwater and saltwater. But one of the funny things was, I broke a cardinal rule. I threw something in my tank without thinking about it, and I had an immediate cause and effect. Which, like, one of my fish was trying to jump out of the tank. He was like going bazonkers. And just water quality and how easily it can be affected, whether freshwater or saltwater. Many of us both, I think all of us, have
We
kept
probably
both
all made that
freshwater and
mistake. So.
saltwater, and it's just so funny. So yeah, I hope you guys have your questions ready. I'll be monitoring the comments as I see them coming in now, and don't feel left out. We're gonna go through a great presentation Lou has for us, and I will be pulling the questions as you post them in the comments. So welcome everybody.
D, it's great to be here. I love your intro, man. I do a lot of these presentations. Nobody's got that intro package like that. I love that.
I almost had a picture of you with like a crown on and a baton with like water, and I said that might be over the top a little bit. I've been known to go overboard a little bit.
It's all good. It's all good.
And then I looked over my shoulder, and a fish was like jumping out of the tank.
Oh man, that is insane.
I was like, "What the heck's going on there?" But just club news before we go into it. First and foremost, thank all of you guys that are members of our Facebook page, the website, following us on all the social medias, because it's very hard for us. We're a public supported club. It's very hard for us maintaining when we can't meet in person. Yes, we do want to meet in person. We're working with the powers that be, the New York Aquarium, and working on when we can actually get there. And I really miss all of you guys because there's nothing like meeting in person and having that personal one-on-one energy. So we're working on that.
We need your money.
Yeah, that too. Money helps. Just looked at that. The fiscal crisis is affecting everybody from renters, clubs, organizations, retail. So yeah, we're hustling, and we are posting things for sale as far as tanks, because it's things that we were trying to keep you guys going with. We're posting, any tanks we have in storage for sale. We have a few all-in-one systems that I'll repost after the stream is done. And they're just trying to perpetuate the hobby and keep people motivated. It's hard for everybody. I collected all of the names. I collected many of your names that took part in the giveaway. Wonderful, wonderful Lou here, Lou Ekus, Tropic Marin, has donated
just to say,
some.
Again, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
No. For one thing, too, if you not only post things online, if people are interested in something, you're looking for something, you're looking for tanks or equipment or something, put a line onto Facebook or something, and we'll take a look. If we have it, we'll try to hook you up with something.
Because Brooklyn Aquarium Society is all about the hookup and bringing that hard to find to the hard to look for. Bringing the people together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we have some awesome nitrite, professional grade test kits that we're going to raffle off. I collected the names. If you did not, and it's a cardinal sin, if you did not follow us on Facebook, you better follow right now, because we do things like this on a regular, at least once a month. You had to put water change in the comments below. If you didn't already, I'm gonna give you a last minute shot, as I have the picker wheel running in the background. So the code is water change. If you're not already entered the win one of these awesome nitrite test kits, say that 3 times fast. Put that comment water change in the comments below, and I'm monitoring them.
These are
Was
professional nitrate kits. Remember,
professional.
these are high quality, right, Lou?
Yeah, we
They-
have the
they-
two. We have the lower resolution one, which is the basic, and then we have the pro, which is the higher resolution. These are the pro kits.
Right. And we thank you
and
for donating to our club. Like you've been a loyal supporter of us for a long time. And if it wasn't
Always a
for
pleasure.
companies like your company, we wouldn't be in existence. You know, it's plain and
No,
simple.
well, and companies like our company need clubs like your club.
Right. Well, that's it. We work together all the time. It's for the hobby, right?
Absolutely.
And for everybody else, I also put the website in the scroll below so you can check out the website. I love the website. I love what you guys did with it. The upgrades are actually really well done.
Yeah, we're working on it. There's a couple of links that aren't working right, and there's some things on there that we want to change. But I do like the new graphics that we've done. I like the way it's laid out. I think it's very user friendly, and we have a lot of very specific information that's coming online onto the new website now that the framework is there. So I'm kind of excited about where that whole website thing is headed.
And there's a lot of information on it. I was actually reading through it yesterday. If you guys don't know, there's a lot of information on the Tropic Marine website, not only about the products, but some general science things like the effect on water quality, like nitrate, and some little things that, you know, we can easily gloss over. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out. It is still a work in process, but many of the items of information are very valuable. All right, now I don't know, Steve. I'm gonna take a vote. Because I see Mr. Kogan in the back room here. Should I let him in, or should he have him huff and puff and try
Who's
to blow
this?
the door down? Gene
Who's
is in the
this?
back room.
You can let him in. Just mute him. There he is. What's up, Gene? How you feeling?
His neck's working. He's looking better there.
Look at that. I think you look taller. Gene had back surgery, so.
Gene's the vice president of our
Neck surgery.
neck surgery. Yeah, he was short, so they added about 4 inches to him.
Hey, I might go for it then.
All right. I hear his wife yelling at him, so I'm gonna meet you, Gene. I'll get you some. So now we can go right into it. One of the things that I'm going to reiterate is that we have, well, I already mentioned the test kits. We're going to go into those probably at the end of the presentation, so stay tuned. I'm going to call the names out. We're going to have the randomizer pick the names from the list, in addition to whomever has not already entered. I see producer Reef. I'm going to add you into the box here. And we also have a donation from one of our other sponsors from Pinplaque. So I'm going to mention that only to those that stay to the end, because you know how we do. You got to stay to the end, yada, yada, yada. So, yeah, we're going to talk about water changes. And Lou has a great presentation, so I'm going to give you the space to cue that up. And while he does that, I'm going to enter producer's Reef. Ran out of TM reef salt and just bought the bioactive because that local fish store didn't have any more, and I need a water change. Yo, yeah, producer, yo, there's nothing like running out of salt and finding out just when you're getting ready to do the water change that you don't have any salt. So
that's why I'm always looking for the sales online, buy them, put them away. I have extra all the time.
We're going to talk about the Tropic Marine reef salt too, because I've been testing a lot of the reef salts that we think have the products, or rather the elements in them, don't. So that's going to be one of the items of discussion, and that also affects what we dose into the tank. Okay,
you can definitely see a difference from one salt. I've tried a lot over the years, and I don't want to stop bringing names out and stuff like that, but there's a couple that I had problems with, and a few that are always stable. They're the same. You check them all the time, you know. So there's definitely a difference in quality. It's not salt. It's not salt.
Yeah, but I'm sure that's another question that we got not too long ago. They asked about the Tropic Marine salt, so I'm going to let Luke do his presentation. Sure. And if you guys have any questions, post them in the comments. I'm going to cue this up, and you can start whenever you're ready. Just start out, give us a little background about yourself. I feel like I'm interviewing, like I'm like Vanna White or somebody. There.
Well, normally if I'd be given background of myself, I have me on the screen, but this StreamYard is new to me, so I'm just kind of learning how to use it.
That's all right. You're on the screen. We can see you. I can
Okay,
make you.
great.
I can make you mainstream there for a
All
while.
right, awesome. So I also had some surgery yesterday on my hand, so I'm working one-handed here tonight. I've been the CEO of Tropic Marin USA for a little over 22 years.
Wow.
I got into the hobby. I got addicted, just like all of us do. I had a huge system, and that's how I ended up meeting up with these the Tropic Marin people. And I ended up making I don't know, you could call it a mistake, you could call it a great thing, but I made that move of making my hobby my career. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not so great. I don't keep a reef tank anymore because I travel so much now. But I do have I've got a 150-gallon cichlid tank. I've got a mangrove tank that we play with, so I always keep my hands wet. But I love the company. And the reason I went with this company and got on board with them is because I like the science behind their products. They really are careful about their science. The company has been around forever. Tropic Marin goes way back, over 55, almost 60 years. There's a lot of debate whether it was Instant Ocean or Tropic Marin first, but those were the first two companies that made sea salt in the lab. You'll notice that I never use the term synthetic sea salt because I hate that term, because it's not synthetic. It's man-made, but it's not synthetic. We don't make sodium chloride. We don't make magnesium sulfate. We assemble those components in the lab. And one of the advantages of doing it in a lab is that you can do it a lot cleaner, because in the lab you can buy raw materials like we do that are pharmaceutical grade, that are very pure and very clean. Now, enough about Tropic Marin. I don't want to make this a Tropic Marin thing. I really want to talk tonight about water changes and about additives. We're going to talk in general about these things, but this is really where it all kind of starts. And if you can understand the basics of what does it mean, what does a water change do, why might you want to do it or might you not want to do it, what are the advantages of doing them, what are the disadvantages of doing them, what are the advantages of not doing them or disadvantages of not doing them. We're going to keep it really basic tonight. And I've got some of your questions here. I'm also going to answer any questions that you have after we get done. Deal, queue them up for me, and we'll just get answers to all of your questions. I'm going to cover a little bit more about water changes than I am about additives, because seriously, I could talk about additives for days. You don't want me to go into all the detail that I could go into on additives, but I am going to touch on the major additives and kind of what you want to look at. So that's just kind of an overview of where we're going. So if you're good, B, we're going to go ahead and get into this.
I gotcha.
Water changes are one of the most basic things that you're going to be doing in a saltwater tank or a freshwater tank. It's always good to know the basics. You're going to maintain your system differently depending on how that system is set up. I mean, if you've got a system like this guy here, you're going to maintain this system. Your maintenance program on this system is going to be very different than the maintenance program that you would have on this little nano cube here. So you really have to decide. It's your choice to decide how you're going to maintain your system. And that choice is going to be dependent upon what the system tells you. I'm a big proponent of letting the system tell you what it needs. All right. So let's talk about the big elephant in the room, water changes. Do we even need to do them? Are they necessary? Is it something that you absolutely have to do? Do you know people that run a successful tank without water changes? Absolutely. So is it really necessary? Well, there's three main reasons that you're going to consider doing a water change. And there are others, but I'm going to focus on these. I'm going to go through these three main ones. The first one is nutrient export. The second one is using the water changes to replenish important stuff that got diminished in the tank. And the last thing is a water change is one of your best Band-Aids, one of your best tourniquets to stop the bleeding when you've got some kind of critical situation going on in your system. So we're going to talk about these one at a time. So first, we're going to talk about nutrient export. Nutrient export is important whether you've got a freshwater or a saltwater tank. You're going to have to get rid of the nutrients. And here's why. Aquariums are cyclical animals. There's all kinds of cycles in the aquarium. And again, you're going to figure out what your best way is to deal with these different cycles. So let's look at one of the really important cycles. And by the way, I threw this slide in there because we have the ability these days to look at the chemistry in the water and look at the cycles much more specifically than we did when I got into this 20 years ago. Nowadays, with ICP testing, you can send in a sample of water and you can see where your tank parameters are, and you can look at what do the tank parameters look like when the tank looks good, and when the tank is bad, what does the tank parameters look like, and how do I compare those two? Maybe I can find the difference. We can look at those parameters so much more specifically than we could 20 years ago that it makes the job actually much easier, as long as you don't get caught in the trap of chasing numbers, because that's the one thing that looking at these very, very minute concentrations can get you concerned about, whether your pH is 8.25 or 8.28, which you really shouldn't care at all. So here's one of the cycles that's really important for us to look at. You're going to feed your fish or your corals or whatever it is that you have as livestock in your aquarium. They're going to produce waste, and the waste is going to foul your tank. Now, granted, this is a really bad one, but this is how it can get if you don't do any type of nutrient export. You've got to get rid of the stuff that is given off from the fact that your fish are eating and pooping and peeing in that tank. Now, algae loves some of those nutrients. And in fact, algae is a great way to export those nutrients. But you don't want your tank to overgrow algae like this because now you can't see anything else in your tank. But it is doing nutrient export. So here's your cycle. You're feeding the fish are eating, they're pooping and peeing and creating a bunch of all kinds of waste products, and the plant matter, the algae, can remove a lot of it. Now, in some systems, and you guys are going to be very familiar with this concept, in some systems, we're going to really benefit from this. We're going to really take advantage of this, and we're going to use this nutrient export on the plant side, maybe to grow a planted aquarium. And the time frame between that tank and this one, those are the same tank. The time frame is a few weeks. And this is how powerful the growth can be when you've got good nutrients in that water. You can make some beautiful aquascapes with the use of these nutrients growing macro algae like this. And you've all seen, some of these gorgeous aquascapes that are done like this. But sometimes it's just not enough. The plants can take a certain amount out, but they can't get always everything that we need exported from the system. And that's when we've got this other part that comes into play, the water change. Now, in this particular diagram, it says 10 to 15%. We'll talk about percentage of water changes a little bit later. Bottom line is, could be anywhere from 5 to 10% in a large system. If you've got a nano system going, it's much easier to do larger percentage water changes. I know people in nano systems, that have a 5-gallon reef and they do an 80% or a 90% water change every week or two. That's another way to go. So that's the first one. That's the nutrient export part of this this equation. The second part is replenishing diminished essentials. Now, this is an important one, and I want to show you exactly why. So polyps, I've got to use some type of example, freshwater, saltwater, reef or not. So I tend to be a reef guy, so a lot of my examples are reef examples, but the same thing is true of other compounds with other animals in the tank. I'm just using corals and reef as an example because that's what I'm comfortable with. So polyps are going to use calcium and carbonates to build their skeletal structure. So here's just a little schematic of a coral polyp. And out in the water column, you've got these carbonate ions and calcium ions. So these light blue ones are calcium ions, and these darker purple ones are carbonate ions. Now, keep in mind that ions have a charge on them. So ions don't generally float around a tank free like this. These are all free ions. So in this little snapshot of this tank that I'm showing you, there's lots of other carbonate ions that are attached to something. And there's lots of other calcium ions that are attached to something. And what I'm doing is I'm deleting all of those out of the water. I'm getting rid of all of them. And I'm only showing you ones that are free ions in this particular instant in time. This is just a snapshot in time. And these are the ions that are free. And the reason I'm showing you the free ones is because those are the ones that we're going to be messing with. All right. So what happens is they float around the tank until the zooxanthellae, the coral polyp, with the help of the zooxanthellae, identify a pair, a carbonate and a calcium pair, and it's going to put those two together and deposit them at the base of the coral, which is going to help build the skeleton. And it's going to continue to pull these calcium carbonate pairs out of the water column and deposit them down at the base of the coral, and they're going to continue to build that skeletal structure. Now, the reason I'm showing you all of this is because you can see now that all of that calcium carbonate, all this purple stuff is meant to be calcium carbonate. All that calcium carbonate from the water column is down in the skeleton of the coral. And look at what's happened out here. It's pretty much gone. And that's why we need to replenish it, because the corals are going to take out what they need. All right. Now, this is when people usually say to me, but I do water changes to replenish all of that stuff that the corals are taking out. And keep in mind, I'm showing you calcium and carbonate here, but this is same type of process is true with lots of other things as well. So once again, I got to tell you, it's not enough. And in fact, the first thing we talked about with the nutrient export, sometimes the macroalgae that you have in a refugium can be enough for nutrient export. Water changes, unless you've got a nano tank and you're doing an 80 or 90% water change every week or two, water changes are not going to be enough to replenish the things that are depleted. And if we can do better, then good is just not enough. Now, I'm going to put some numbers on this because I want you to really see how critical this can get. So let's say you've got a reef tank. And those of you that are freshwater keepers, just bear with us here. The same thing can happen in your tank. It's just a little bit more critical in a reef tank. That's why I'm using the reef example. So let's say you want to maintain your calcium level at 420 parts per million in your reef aquarium. And let's say that over the course of the next few days before your water change, your calcium drops from 420 to 380, which is completely reasonable numbers. Well, you're going to do a 10% water change today, and you're going to mix up seawater that has natural seawater concentrations of calcium and other elements in it. And natural seawater is around 420 to 440. So I'm using the 420 here because it's a nice round number. It was also what you wanted to keep your tank at over there. So you're going to do a 10% water change with 420 part per million water. Well, the equation goes like this. The difference between your aquarium water, which is 380, and your water change water, which is 420, is 40 parts per million. But you're just doing a 10% water change. So that means it's the 40 parts per million times just the 10%. That means that you're actually going to change the concentration in your tank today by 4 parts per million, from 380 to 384. Keep in mind, this is also only on the one day that you're doing the water change. So you can see it's nowhere near enough. And this is true in a reef tank of magnesium and potassium and all iodine, all the other things that we want to maintain. Water changes are just not enough to make up those differences. All right. Now we're down to the third thing that water changes are good for. They're good as a first line of defense in some critical situation. You notice there's a problem, and you see it in your aquarium. D put a plant in his aquarium tonight, and he noticed that there was a problem. Now with corals, once that problem shows up and things start to look bad, it may already be too late to save those corals. When your corals are showing you that there's a problem, the thing that really annoyed them probably happened a week or two ago. Now, with Dee's tank, it's an immediate reaction because it's a vertebrate, it's a fish. Something about that plant that was put in he didn't like, and it reacted immediately. But with corals, the reaction can be quite delayed. So by the time you see the coral is in trouble, it is probably too late to totally fix it. But of course, you're going to want to try. You're going to look back and you're going to try to figure out what happened. And you need resources to be able to do that. Well, here's one of those things where ICP tests are very useful. But your ICP test is only useful when your tank is going down as a comparison to what the tank was when the tank was in good shape. So you want to take a few ICP tests when the tank is doing really well. So then when something happens in the tank, you can look back now at this ICP test that you just did and the ICP test results when the tank was doing well and figure out what happened in that tank. Now, let me show you the kind of thing that can be influenced, the kind of thing that can happen. So I'm going to go back to that calcium and carbonate skeleton again that the corals build. Now, in a perfect world, the way it works is this. Here's those carbonate and those calcium ions again. And what happens is the calcium ions will bond to the carbonate, making calcium carbonate. You've all heard that term. So this is calcium carbonate. And just like this calcium bonded to this carbonate, this calcium can now bond to that carbonate, and it's going to create a crystal. It's a very, very clean crystal formation where all the calcium bonds to the carbonates and the carbonates bond to the calcium, and you end up with this very, very efficient, beautifully put together crystalline structure. And once again, just like we saw when we were looking at the coral polyp, notice that all of the calcium and the carbonate ions are in here, and now they're gone in the water column, so we need to add them. All right, that is what happens when everything is running well. But let's see what would happen if we just have one little issue. We happen to have a high phosphate level, and I'm sure none of you have ever had a high phosphate level, but we have a high, and the reason I pick high phosphate level is because it's very common. So here's what happens with a high phosphate level. Now we've got the same diagram here. You still see these free calcium and carbonate ions, but you'll notice also that I've put in a couple of these big yellow phosphate ions. Now here's what happens. Just like before, the crystalline structure starts to form. The calcium carbonate starts to form, and we're getting a nice crystal there. But what happens is that because there's so much phosphate in the water, the phosphate gets into our crystalline structure and takes the place of the carbonate. And the problem with that is that the calcium has a lot of trouble bonding back to the phosphate, where it has no trouble bonding back to the carbonate. So now what happens is this crystal is essentially shut down. It can't continue to form. So if you don't export that phosphate, if you don't get rid of that phosphate, now your corals can't build their calcium carbonate skeleton as effectively, and you're left with all of this calcium and carbonate out in the water column because it can't get into the crystal because the stupid phosphates are there. That's just one example of why you need to do this type of nutrient export. Now, we would love all of the world to stay in beautiful balance all the time, but as you are well aware, it just doesn't work like that. It's going to go out of balance. If there's one thing I've learned about keeping aquariums in doing this professionally for 22 years, it's that these ecosystems that we create are constantly changing. You're never done. What's in balance today is going to be out of balance tomorrow. And you have to really love the thrill of the chase. You have to really love chasing down those imbalances and fixing them. If you don't, then don't go into this hobby, because that's what the hobby is all about. And the satisfaction of having a beautiful tank is that you've done that tracking down of those imbalances successfully over the course of the last few years. So what can you do to avoid all these issues? What can you do to help these problems? Well, we've established that the corals need that calcium and those carbonates. What you can do is you can add them. Don't depend on your water change, because your water change is not going to give you enough. Now, this is from when I speak live and I ask the audience, how many of you do two-part additives? A part A and a part B, a calcium and alkalinity additive.
Many of us.
I'm sure many of you do. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you what is the downside of the two-part system. Because once you understand what the issue is with the two-part system, it's very easy then to understand all of the wonderful ways that we have now that avoid that problem. So first, we're going to talk about what is the problem with the two-part system. Well, here's the problem. In the two-part system, you have basically a part A, which is calcium chloride, and a part B, which is sodium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate or some combination of those two. I'm using just sodium carbonate here just to keep the explanation nice and simple with 4 little balls instead of more. Now, when all of this stuff goes into solution, the corals are going to take the calcium from the calcium chloride and the carbonate from the sodium bicarbonate, and they're going to put it together. Remember, we showed already many times, they're going to make that calcium carbonate skeleton. So those two are going to go down into the coral. They're gone. And there's nothing you can do about the fact that if you start with calcium chloride and you get rid of the calcium, you're going to be left with the chloride. It's not going to evaporate. It's not going to go anywhere. Same thing with the sodium bicarbonate. If you get rid of the carbonate, you're going to be left with the sodium. Now, in some ways, that's very convenient because chloride and sodium have a wonderful marriage, a wonderful chemical affinity for each other, and they like to make sodium chloride, which is salt. 70% of sea salt, approximately 70% of sea salt, is sodium chloride. So you're not creating anything toxic or horrible. You're just creating a little bit more of what is already 70% of the salt that's in your tank. But here's where the problem comes in. You're going to continue to add more and more part A and B. And as you add more and more part A and B, you're going to create more and more sodium chloride. Now, here's why this is an issue. D, is everybody able to see me personally now?
I'll put you in the mix.
Put me in the mix.
Yep, there you go.
All right. So even though I had hand surgery yesterday, the only way I can explain this is with my hands. So I'm going to use my hands here. My hand that had the surgery is going to be my sodium chloride hand. And this is going to be the everything else hand. So what I mean by that is this. When you do the salinity, when you check the salinity in your tank or your specific gravity, you're basically checking how much stuff is floating around in the water that's not water. 70% of what's floating around in the water that's not water is sodium chloride. 30% is other stuff. Now, what's in that other stuff? Well, the vast majority of the other stuff is magnesium. However, there's also all 70 trace elements in that 30% of other stuff. Your animals want the other stuff even more than they need the sodium chloride. But the way the ocean is designed is that it's 70% sodium chloride and 30% other stuff. The average of these two things together will measure out to the 1.025 or 1.026, wherever you keep your aquarium. Well, I'll use 1.026 today. This imaginary line of 1.026 is made up of 70% sodium chloride and 30% other stuff. Now, when you do the A and B additive and you create all this extra sodium chloride, you're going to increase the sodium chloride level. You're not increasing the other stuff. You're just increasing the sodium chloride. What happens is your salinity, your specific gravity, is going to go up. Very easy to deal with. You're going to dilute it with some fresh water. The problem is you're not going to be able to selectively dilute the sodium chloride. You're going to dilute all of this so that the average of it is 1.026. But it's not 70-30 anymore. Now it's like 75-25. So it's still 1.026, but it's more sodium chloride and less of the stuff that your animals really need. Now we add more sodium chloride and dilute it again, and more sodium chloride and dilute it again, and more sodium chloride and dilute it again. And you can see what's happened is that my everything else hand has disappeared, because as I add more and more sodium chloride, if I keep the specific gravity at 1.026, I've got to have less of everything else in the system. So all the things that your animals really want are getting less, and the sodium chloride is getting more. That is the issue with the two-part system. All right, D, I'm done with my hands. You can get rid of me now. We'll go back to my presentation.
Okay, because I have a question that touches upon that, and then it kind of goes back to where you may have already passed. But
all right.
The first question was, how much phosphate is considered high? Like I know that's kind of a loaded question.
Oh, not
But
at all.
when we ask what is considered a high phosphate level, and the reason I said it touches upon that because a lot of us do auto dose,
Mhm.
and when we auto dose, one of the big things about trying to reduce the phosphate has been people trying to do water changes to reduce the phosphate, and more often than not, it has no effect.
Right. Okay. There's a good reason it doesn't have an effect. So let me explain, because this is an easy thing to explain. The first part of the question is, what do we consider a decent phosphate level? I'm assuming we're talking about reef tanks now, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So in a reef tank, the tropic marine approach, and if you talk to 5 guys, you're going to get 10 different answers for this. But the tropic marine approach is, we consider the sweet spot of phosphate to be between 0.03 or 0.04 parts per million up to about 0.1 part per million. If you're up at 0.11 or 0.12, that's fine. But if you go much higher than that, you're generally really fostering some algae growth or cyanobacteria growth. And if you go much lower than 0.03, your corals are completely starved for phosphates. So optimum phosphate level between 0.03 and 0.1 ppm. That's the first part of the answer to the question. Second part of the answer to the question is this. You said, why don't my phosphate level go down when I do a water change? Well, it depends on what your numbers are. If your phosphate in your tank is 0.3 and you do a 20% water change with clean water change water, they will go down. But if your phosphate level is 0.05 and you make up clean water change water, that it may not go down. And the reason it would not go down is because I can't speak for all salts. I can only speak for tropic marine. But phosphate does not have a minimum requirement for pharmaceutical grade. And since sodium chloride, all sodium chloride on the earth comes from the ocean, most sodium chlorides have at the very minimum, natural seawater levels of phosphate in them. So your fresh water change water that you make up could have anywhere from 0.03 to 0.08 or 0.1 phosphate level in it. So if you have a 0.05 phosphate level in your aquarium and you do a water change, it may not necessarily go down. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did, because the following that same train of thought, no one ever asks about phosphates in freshwater, but we usually use the same water to do freshwater changes or saltwater changes, with the exception of RO. But how likely is it that an RO unit is going to remove phosphate?
RO unit will remove quite a bit of the phosphate, but what I'm saying is that if you're mixing salt then in that water, this is obviously not true.
Yeah, the salt contains phosphate then.
But the salt is going to have some very low level of phosphate in it.
Gotcha. You answered it. Spot on.
All right. So are we back at my sodium chloride screen here?
Yep, we're there.
All right. So now we're going to move on from here. So now we know the downside of this of the two-part method. And there's lots of different ways around this. There's lots of different ways to have success in doing this without running into this problem. One of the ways is with the balling method. And I'm going to just briefly explain what the balling method is, because once you understand the problem with the two-part, it's very easy to understand how the balling method works. The reason I like talking about the balling method as a first step is because it was the first way that was developed really around this problem. Now we have other ways that are also as elegant. But each way has its benefits. The advantage of the balling method is that since you have 3 different solutions, you have complete control over how much calcium, how much alkalinity is going into the tank. And that isn't true of some of the other methods. So here's the way the balling method works. Just like the 2-part method, you've got a part A with calcium chloride. And just like the 2-part method, you've got a part B with sodium bicarbonate. But what Hans Werner Balling did in 1994, and then he revised the method in 96 in Dots magazine in Germany, was that he added the part C. And the part C is that other 30%. It's everything that's in sea salt, but no sodium chloride, no calcium, and no carbonates. And here's the way it works. Just like the 2-part, when these things go into solution, the calcium carbonate goes down into the corals, leaving you with the chloride and the sodium that still create sodium chloride. But now, instead of just building sodium chloride, we're going to also add that other 30%. These 2 things together are just complete sea salt. So if you can come back to me for a second, D.
Gotcha.
All right. If you remember our other example where we added sodium chloride and diluted, and that's why we had this ionic imbalance. With the Balling method, we add the sodium chloride as the byproduct of the A and B, and then we also add the part C, and then we dilute it. Then we add more A and B, more part C, and dilute it again. So instead of imbalance growing, we're just adding extra salt and diluting it, adding extra salt and diluting it, and ending up right back where we started. And the ionic balance is maintained. That's the Balling method.
So by using that method, do you not have to add other stuff, trace elements, strontium, things like that, calcium, whatever? Not calcium, sorry, amino acids.
Well, this is one of the really, this is what you're asking is the most misunderstood part of the Balling method. Mm-hmm. The part C contains magnesium and all 70 trace elements. So technically, you are adding magnesium and trace elements with the part C, okay? However, you are only adding enough to ionically balance the leftover sodium chloride from the part A and B. So in the Balling method, you still need to add trace elements and you still need to add magnesium separately because the part C doesn't supplement for used trace elements and magnesium, even though it is technically adding trace elements and magnesium, it's not supplementing for used trace elements and magnesium. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so now, again, trace elements, some people put amino acids, iodine, strontium. Do you still put all this other stuff too? And do you believe in all those different chemicals? I mean,
at times, and I'm gonna touch on those in a minute.
Okay. All right.
We're gonna talk about what trace elements you may want to keep a watch on, but it also depends on what you're growing. You know, if you're
different corals, right?
Yeah, if you're trying to propagate xenia, you're gonna boost up your strontium level. You know, certain
my xenia grows. I can't control it. It grows so fast.
Yeah, everybody complains about the xenia.
Yep, and then I have tanks where and then I have tanks where xenia won't grow. One tank it'll grow like crazy, and another tank it won't grow at all.
And that is the ultimate example. I always say to people, your system is your system. You can set up 2 identical systems right next to each other in the same room, and one system will do one thing and the other system will do something else. It's just the way it is. And this is why you have to constantly be analyzing what's going on and what do I have to do to get that system to do what I want it to do. And more importantly, what is the system telling me? because the system speaks to you. The system
Yeah.
tells you what it needs. You just
I
got to
believe that,
listen.
yeah.
You just got to listen. So there's other ways to do this, and this calcium, and keep in mind, I'm just focusing on calcium and alkalinity additives right now, because, and I said at the beginning of the presentation, I'm not going to talk about all additives because we'd be here for a week. But it's interesting that there's other ways to do this, and each way has its advantages and its disadvantages. The advantage to the balling method is I have complete control over the amount of calcium and alkalinity going in, and I can have more of one or more of the other. The disadvantage is I need 3 dosing pumps to do it. That's a big disadvantage. It's also a disadvantage that I end up getting that raise in the salinity that I have to constantly compensate for and dilute. But there's some new innovations these days and other ways to do this. So one way is with carbocalcium. Carbocalcium is based in calcium formate. Now, the interesting thing about calcium formate is that you're going to create a single solution. It comes as both a solution and a powder that you mix with RODI water. It's a single solution that will dose both calcium and alkalinity for you. It's very, very concentrated. You're only going to use about 5 mLs per 26 gallons per day. There's no ionic imbalance created. It doesn't raise the salinity. There's no sodium chloride produced. There's no excess carbon dioxide produced. You're literally just adding calcium and alkalinity in an extremely concentrated form. And you can put it on a dosing pump once you know how much the tank needs, and you're good to go. You can also add trace elements to this, by the way, if you wanted to. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, once we figured out, by the way, how we could put both calcium and alkalinity in a single solution with carbocalcium, then we realized we could also add trace elements and magnesium to that same solution, so that now you have one solution with your complete mineral supply: calcium, alkalinity, all the trace elements, and magnesium, all in one solution. So then the question is, well, this seems like almost too easy. What's the disadvantage? As I told you, every system of doing this has its advantages and its disadvantages. The advantage of the balling method is I've got complete control over the ratio of calcium to alkalinity going in. With my carbocalcium, because my calcium and my alkalinity are both in one solution, I have no control over the ratio of those two. I'm going to be adding the same amount of calcium and the same amount of alkalinity given X amount of carbocalcium liquid. So I lose that control. Once I go to the alpha reef, now I've got no control over the proportion of calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, or trace elements going in, because it's all in the one solution. So advantage, one dosing pump does everything. Disadvantage, I may need another product to tweak one of the parameters because I lose the control of the ratio of which of those things go in.
Right. You may have a high magnesium already and a low calcium, or vice versa, and you don't need to be putting them exactly right.
Exactly. Now,
you did say, I'm sorry, one thing. You did say the dosing pumps. I mean, I've always used the Be Ionic, the 2-part, and I've just poured them in my sump. Is that a bad thing, or that it should be dosed in slowly, or?
No. You can do exactly what you're doing, but the Be Ionic does not have all of the trace elements.
No. I understand that, but like the other one, you were saying you need 3 dosing pumps. You don't need. You can pour them in one at a time into your sump or something, right?
Right. You can dose the 3 solutions of the balling method manually.
Okay.
I just mentioned dosing pumps because,
right.
Automated.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could word it a different way. We could say the disadvantage of the balling method is that you have 3 solutions that you either have to put on dosing pumps or 3 solutions that you have to dose manually. Either way, it's a pain. It's a little bit of a pain.
I understand. Yeah.
But you have complete control over the percentages, which is nice. And then you were asking Steve about trace elements. We make there are 70 trace elements in natural seawater, approximately. The interesting thing about trace elements is that all tanks use different amounts and different trace elements. One thing that is true, though, that's very interesting is that out of the 70 trace elements, all reef tanks will see the same 17 trace elements go down very quickly. So what Tropic Marin does is that we separate those 17 trace elements into the 10 positive ions and the 7 negative ions so that they don't precipitate. This way they stay in solution. And the trace K has these guys here, and the trace A has those 7 there. And you can add the trace A and the trace K to the carbocalcium so that you get a single solution that does alkalinity and calcium and trace elements, and then do your magnesium separately. That's actually the way I prefer to do a larger system. All right. Now let's look at other things that you may want to be looking at as well. So magnesium is definitely one of those things that you also want to look at, in addition to calcium and alkalinity. The reason being that the only calcium that is biologically available to your corals is the calcium that is in a 1-to-3 ratio with magnesium. So if you have, for instance, a calcium level of 500, but your magnesium level has dropped to 900, then only 300 ppm of your 500 ppm calcium are really being seen by your corals. Natural seawater is approximately 1-to-3, about 420 to 440 parts per million of calcium, and about 1,290 to 1,300 parts per million of magnesium. So very close to 1-to-3. So magnesium is an important one. It's also a very weird one because I see a lot of tanks that don't use any magnesium, and then for years, and then all of a sudden they start using tons of magnesium, and then a few months later they go back to using almost no magnesium. And frankly, I have no scientific explanation for why that happens. I just have seen it. I have just seen it happen many, many times. Now, other things that you may want to think about kind of keeping an eye on, and these are hard things to keep an eye on, but with ICP testing, you can. You're going to want to keep an eye on your potassium level. You'd like that to be around 400 ppm. Potassium is extremely important to certain enzymatic activities in the corals. So potassium can be an important one. You're going to want to keep an eye on your iodine level. Iodine is almost always going to test low. I'll say it again. Iodine is almost always going to test low. It is taken up so quickly in an aquarium that you do a water change today with water that has 120 micrograms of iodine in it, and tomorrow it's down to 20 micrograms. Iodine's taken up very quickly. You just want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the iodine. If there is an issue in the tank and you're always showing 0 iodine, you may need more iodine in the system. Strontium is another one. Very, very low concentration, about 8 parts per million, but another one that you may want to keep an eye on. Very important in the skeletal structures of the corals. And also manganese. Manganese is a little bit like iodine and iron, where it gets taken up so quickly that, and it's in such small quantities, about 0.16 parts per billion, that it's very, very tough to keep an eye on it. But it's something that you want to maybe think about if you're having any issues in the tank that you may want to address. You might want to think about amino acids as an additive at some point. I'm not going to go into great detail with those tonight because that's kind of that's a whole other subject. Carbon dosing, also a whole other subject that is really important and extremely beneficial, but you may want to think about whether you want to be doing that or not. At the end of the day, you want to make your life easy. There's an easy way to do things, and there's a hard way to do things. And getting set up so that water changes are easy is one of the best things that you can do, because it's going to be one of the resources that you're going to go to time and time again. Getting set up to do water changes easily can be as complicated and sophisticated or as basic as you like. But the bottom line is could literally be a couple of buckets. But the idea is to get yourself set up so that you can do water changes easily. Get yourself set up so water changes can be fun, so that it's not the worst thing in the world. So you're not dreading the water change, because the water change is going to help your tank most of the time. And if it's not helping, it may be getting you out of trouble. Now, you want to be able to do it so that you can do your water changes all the time. Those of you that are older in the group may actually get this reference. All right. Now, I want to put a stop on water changes for 1 second, because there is one instance where you absolutely do not want to do a water change. And that is when your tank is crashing. This is when you are most apt to want to do your water change. And it's when you have to absolutely stop and do some testing before you do your water change. And here's why. Ammonia is going to exist in your tank as either ammonium, which is NH4, or ammonia, which is NH3. NH4 is not very toxic. And it's going to, the bulk of the ammonia is going to exist as ammonium if your pH is low or your temperature is low, or both. As the pH goes up, that ammonium is going to be converted to extremely toxic ammonia. Now, here's what sometimes happens in tanks, and this happens in both freshwater and in saltwater tanks, but it's really dangerous in saltwater tanks because we're usually running at this higher pH where all of our ammonia is, we're keeping our ammonia very low, because if we have too much ammonia at the high pH, it's going to be very toxic. Well, when our tank crashes, that pH is going to tend to go down. And that ammonia is going to be converted to the less toxic ammonium. And if the tank is crashing, then something's wrong. A fish is dead and rotting, producing more ammonium. Now we've got a tank with a low pH, a lot of ammonium, and I'm freaking out. So I do a 50% water change. Well, my 50% water change gets rid of only 50% of my ammonium, but it puts in enough alkalinity to raise my pH. And now my pH comes up and my less toxic ammonium turns to toxic ammonia and brings the whole tank down.
Wow.
So when your tank is crashing, the first thing you do is go grab your ammonia test kit before you do anything. The worst thing you can do to a crashing tank is to do a huge water change without testing for ammonia. The first thing you do is test for ammonia. The next thing you do is test for pH, and then you take the temperature of the tank. Once you know those three things, you know how to not get caught in this situation. I have seen this happen a number of times, and I can guarantee you it will take a crashing tank down to nothing. Done.
Wow.
So in this situation, do you do smaller water changes?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So better do small, and how often, like waiting between them, or?
You have to do smaller water changes. You have to bring the pH up extremely slowly. You have to use there's different sponges that you can use to, to get the ammonia out of the system.
Right.
What you want to do is you want to let your nitrification cycle deal with the ammonia
Ammonia load.
before you bring the pH
Wow.
up.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, definitely something that we all probably thought the opposite.
Oh,
Get
that
rid of it, get rid of
definitely
it.
brought it. Yeah, that definitely brought a lot of tanks down because
It's why I mention it, because sometimes that you have to let that crashing tank run its nitrogen cycle to get rid of the ammonia. If you don't have ammonia, you're fine. Do your water change. But if your pH is low and you've got ammonia in the tank, you have to say, I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to go relax and let the nitrogen cycle run the ammonia to the nitrite to the nitrate, and get rid of the ammonia before you go slamming that pH up. Everybody wants to correct the pH right away, and if you do that, the tank is absolutely going down.
doomed. Wow. And I think that more often than not affects smaller tanks. Like the only deterrent in most big reef systems is that a big water change is more work. So you're more likely to throw chemicals at it. So is it even worth trying to lower the pH? Like, because I
No,
know even doing the two-part, using that two-part, that alkalinity will raise the pH.
no, the best thing you can do is to let the tank run its nitrogen cycle and get rid of the ammonia. Once the ammonia is gone, you can do whatever you want to the tank.
Hmm.
But you're better off letting the nitrogen cycle fix the ammonia problem before you go messing with parameters. Because whatever you do to the parameters, if you raise your alkalinity, you raise your pH, you're going down. You're going down the tube.
Up flames.
Down in flames.
Okay.
And this is more of a, it is a freshwater problem, but it's more of a saltwater problem, because in a saltwater tank, we're running those higher pHs, and we're right on the borderline of this ammonium ratio. And so if our pH goes down, we're in that dangerous area where we got to be really careful. And I like to mention this to people because people don't understand how dangerous raising the pH, if you've got ammonia in the tank, can be. It literally can just take your entire system down.
Yeah, with saltwater tanks, a lot of people are chasing that 8.2, 8.3. So they're trying to raise the pH.
Yeah, and that's
if you
fine.
don't know, but if you
That's
don't know there's
fine.
ammonia present, then you're
That's
raising the
fine.
ammonia
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. It's fine as long as you don't have the ammonia in there. If you've got ammonia in there and you're at 7.6 because the tank is in trouble, the worst thing you can do is raise it up to 8.4. You just killed your tank.
Wow.
All right.
And that would be you would think right away the common sense thing to do is do water changes to get rid of it.
Yeah,
In salt water, like I said, the tank gets dirty, that pH drops right away. If there's a dead fish or piece of food.
Yep, and there's a simple thing that you need to do. Test for ammonia. If there's no ammonia, you're fine. But if there's ammonia, go get some popcorn and let the tank do what it needs to do.
Okay.
All right.
I've been keeping salt water for a long time, but you're always learning stuff,
Yeah, you know what?
And
definitely.
I learn stuff every day.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing. I would have said the same thing right away. Do a big water change,
Yep. No, that's as long as if there's no ammonia, that's what you do. But if there's an ammonia problem, don't do it. And very often when a tank is crashing, you got ammonia.
Yeah.
All right. Here's where I'm going to just kind of tie this whole thing about water changes up. I have an opinion of water changes that I can't back up scientifically, but I'm going to tell you what it is. When I did have a reef tank, I had reef tanks for years and years and years. I said I don't have one now because I travel too much. Not in the last 2 years, but in general, I travel too much. But when I did have a reef tank, there was one thing that was always 100% true, and that was every single time I did a water change in my tank. Not most of the time, not almost all the time, 100% of the time that I did a water change in my tank, my animals look better the next day.
Of course.
And I've got a theory that all of these compounds that we have floating around in the tank don't stay in exactly the same molecular form forever, for years. And when you do a water change in your tank, it's literally like you're giving your animals a breath of fresh air. It's like you go outside in the spring after being locked up in the house in the winter, and it's a breath of fresh air. And those animals love that. It's all brand new, clean compounds.
Yep.
So in my book, if there's a button that I can push that makes my corals look better, I should probably hit that button once in a while. I'm not one of these people that says you got to do a water change. You know, you got to do 15% every week or every 2 weeks or whatever. I don't care if you don't do a water change every month or every 2 months, but at some point, do a water change. Maybe it's once every 3 months, but when you do a water change, look at your animals the next day. You'll see they look better. And if you can, there is very little that we can do in our systems that always makes those animals look better the next day. And when you find something that's like that, I say you should do it once in a while.
Of course, commenting on that, we have plenty of times members come into us and they'll go, I never do a water change in my tank. My tank's been up and running for 2 years. My tank looks great. And that same member will come into you one month. Why did my tank bomb out all of a sudden?
Well, and also, when you say your tank looks great, it does it. I mean, it
can look better.
Is it 9 on a scale of 1 to 10,
right.
Or is it looking great at 6?
Right. There's a difference between thriving and just surviving.
And it could look like it's even thriving, but maybe it could do better even. You know, we don't know. And so I like to just kind of make this point that there's very little that we know about in reefing, that when you do this, your animals look better. Water changes are one of them.
Absolutely.
Get yourself set up so that it's easy to do them, so that once in a while you can do them, because your animals are going to like that. It's pretty simple thinking. So I am done with my visual part of my presentation. D, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
We know you didn't even get into the details of, like you said, of additives, of amino acids and stuff. So we're going to have you come back another time and talk about that.
Oh, no, absolutely. I do want to run through these questions. Are we running too long or what? Do we need
No, we good. Well, I'm enlightened because definitely the auto dosing thing is a big thing. And the fluctuation with the pH, I was sitting here processing, because one tank I have on the auto doser, and the other tank, which I don't, is actually always done better than the tank. And I'm always like, well, the levels are higher in one, but it's so many other elements that we don't even test for unless you have an ICP test.
Right.
Well, and even ICP,
you know, you really
even
don't
ICP
know.
testing. I'm a fan of ICP testing, but there's 2 things that I don't like about it. One is that it often gets people chasing numbers, because the numbers are so tight that people call me and they say, you know, I got 101 and I really want to have 105. You know, it's like, forget that. The other thing about ICP testing is you have to remember that many of the values that you get back in an ICP test are calculated values. So what that means is that they test for this thing and this thing, and they know that if those 2 things have those numbers, that this third thing has that number. It's a calculated value. And so there's some artifacts in ICP testing.
Right.
Never go chasing one particular ICP test. If you do an ICP test and you see something's wrong in the numbers, do a second ICP test and see if the same thing shows up, because sometimes it doesn't.
Really?
Well, I definitely cross-reference the digital test kits. Like, you know, a lot of us use the digital test kits. A lot of us have aquarium controllers, and these probes and things are prompt to like get miscalibrated. Like, that's something I found out the hard way a year ago, is like, okay, a probe was off and my system was dosing based on that probe, but how
Yeah.
many of us are testing? And I was like, well, I take a good old fashioned strip test or a fluid test and cross-reference the probe, and I found out the probe was way off.
Yeah.
Didn't you have that problem with a pressure gauge too? You thought you had no
Yeah, I
pressure?
had the pressure gauge. I'm changing every line on
He's
my
telling me out there,
RO
so
unit.
maybe the pressure gauge is no good.
I took the RO unit off. I'm
Yeah,
testing
digital-
every chain, and the gauge was bad. I was
Digital
like,
is
$20
good.
gauge.
Digital is good because it's quick, it's easy, it's a no-brainer, but you do have to constantly calibrate and make sure that you're getting valid results. I can't tell you how many people call me with a problem and we end up tracing it back to some digital something
Really?
that was giving them a wrong reading. And I don't want to give you the wrong impression. I'm not against them. I love them because they're quick and easy, but you got to calibrate them and test against them at least once every couple of months.
Right.
At
Oh,
least.
I had people laugh at me. I made video regarding those tests, and people laugh at me because I went out and I bought the 50 strip where you just
Yeah.
dip it and test it. And the only reason I did that is because I have like 13 tanks in here. But if I know if I have 3 tanks and they're all salt water and I go dip it, dip it, dip it, I started dipping the water that I buy the coral in, and what a difference.
Yeah. I
Because
agree.
you're more likely, the easier it is to do that little dip. Okay, the pH is higher, the pH is
Yeah.
lower.
Yes.
Then
When
I
things are
can go
easier,
with
you'll
the
do
digital.
more.
Yeah, then
Yep.
I can go with the digital and get down to a number. Okay, maybe that, whatever the case is. But to find out how different, even the store, if you bought a coral, you bought a jawbreaker or whatever coral, this coral costs you a lot of money, and you put in your tank and it just bombs out. And you're like, wow, everything else in the tank is doing great except
Yeah.
this. But then I tested the water in the bag that I got the coral from and said, oh, his levels were really low, and I'm throwing this coral into something where the levels are really high, and
Yeah.
it just bleach out,
Absolutely.
That's why acclimate slow.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
All right. So
This is my same thing with filters. When a filter's hard or to clean or complicated,
Yeah,
you
you
won't
don't
clean
do
it
it.
as often.
You won't
When you
do
got,
it.
like, for instance, I got a wet dry where you literally just slide the door out, take the pad out, slide
It's
it.
the
You're going
best.
to do that often because it takes literally 20 seconds.
The
yeah.
But when you
best.
have some kind of a canister, and I like canister filters, they polish the water great, but they're a pain in the neck to clean.
Sometimes. All right. So I'm going to run through these questions, D, that you sent me.
Yeah.
First one is, if I don't have any corals, do I need to add additives to my system? I would say not really, as long as you're keeping a good watch on your pH, your alkalinity, your nitrates. As long as those things are fine, fish only tank is a pretty much easier to maintain. You don't have to worry about the calcium level, the magnesium, and that kind of stuff as much. But definitely, you want to keep an eye at least on the alkalinity and the pH and the nitrates, because those things will get out of whack pretty easily in a fish only tank. Because also in a fish only tank, you're feeding more generally, and that helps those things get further out of whack. Next one is, if I use RO, do I need to treat my water with stress coat or chlorine remover? No, as long as your RO unit has a carbon chamber, it should be getting rid of all of the chloramines.
Okay.
There's really not a need for it as long as there's a carbon chamber. The RO membrane alone won't do it. You got to have a carbon chamber to get rid of the chlorines.
Okay.
Why is
And I get change them often enough too.
Yeah,
You got to
exactly.
change the carbon. Right? I need to change mine. With that being said,
Yeah, you don't want to run it for too long. Why is tropic marin different from other salt mixes? Whoa, I could do a whole presentation for you on that.
all right, March.
I'll give you the
March
quick.
presentation.
I'll give you the quick answer. The quick answer is, the one that people mostly don't understand is that when you're paying a little bit more for a higher grade salt mix, you're actually paying for what's not in your salt mix, not what's in your salt mix. Everybody says, oh, they all have everything they need. They do basically have everything they need. The problem is they have also sometimes a lot of stuff that you don't need.
Like phosphates.
The Tropic Marin uses pharmaceutical grade raw materials, which means that these are raw materials that are certified to be a certain cleanliness and to not have contaminants in them, like silicates and other things that you don't want in there, heavy metals. And what you're paying for when you're buying a higher grade salt mix and paying a little bit extra money is you're paying for those high grade raw materials that make sure that you don't have those contaminants in the box. Yes, we have all 70 trace elements, and a lot of the salts don't have all 70 trace elements. Yes, we have an extremely tight quality control procedure because the history of tropic marine is actually in the human pharmaceutical business. And so our quality control is just like human pharmaceuticals, but other companies have good quality control too. The big thing that separates us is the quality of those raw materials. And if you have a problem in your salt and you call me with your batch number, I can tell you where every single component in that salt box that you have, where it came from, when it was mixed, who did the mixing, and everything else. So I think we're a little bit different from most other salt companies in that reference. Number 4, can I use reef salt mixes for cichlid-based systems? Great question. The answer is yes and no. Yes.
Because I know a lot of fish are brackish. A lot of they migrate.
Well, brackish is different. I'm assuming when they say cichlids, they're talking about Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika. Yeah. I'm assuming. If we're talking about South American cichlids, it's a little bit different. But in relation to Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi, both of those lakes contain all 70 trace elements in the water that you find in natural seawater. So from that standpoint, yes, you can use salt for saltwater tanks for African cichlids. However, it's better to get a cichlid salt that is specifically formulated for the cichlids because the ratio of those 70 trace elements in those lakes is a little different than the ratio of those same 70 trace elements in natural seawater. At the end of the day, the quick, easy answer is you're pretty damn close if you're using salt mix for your African cichlids. So yes, yes, you can. Does salt go bad? As long as it doesn't get moist, as long as it doesn't take on moisture. If you've got a bucket of salt that was kept in a dry place, you open it up and the salt is still powdery, use it. The salt does not go bad as long as it stays dry.
And so if you had hard clumps in there where they're going to dissolve again, or is it something you're losing in that?
If there's hard clumps in there, you can. There's a good answer for that. You can try dissolving it. One of two things is going to happen: either it's going to dissolve just like normal, in which case it's fine, or you're going to see a white precipitate. Ooh. If you see a white precipitate, that means that in those clumps, it formed calcium carbonate precipitate. And when it forms calcium carbonate precipitate, there are other elements that get stuck in the precipitate. So it's not perfect at that point. But if it's clumpy and you mix it up and it goes crystal clear, there's no precipitate, no problem. Use it. It's fine. Do you have your own line of water additives and treatments? I think I answered that already. For freshwater and saltwater, the freshwater saltwater question is that in Europe, we have more freshwater additives than what we have here. We don't sell any of our freshwater additives here in the US. They are sold in Europe. Here, we're mostly a saltwater company. And yes, we have, if you need it for saltwater, we have it. Can too many water changes disrupt a tank cycling? This is a really great question. I'm going to give you my opinion. And this is another one of those things. If you ask 5 guys, you're going to get 10 different opinions. In my opinion, the bacteria and the archaea that are responsible for the cycles in the tank are mostly located in the substrate, attached to the gravel, on the surface of the rocks, in the corals. They're on stuff. Now, there is some that's in the water column, but the vast majority is attached to something. So, in my opinion, you can do as many water changes as you want when your tank is cycling. It doesn't decrease the cycling from the standpoint of taking bacteria out of the tank. What it may do is, if you're taking all of the ammonia out of the tank, you're not allowing the archaea to metabolize the ammonia to nitrite and the nitrobacter to metabolize the nitrite to nitrate, because you've taken it out. So from that standpoint, it might slow the cycling a little bit, but it doesn't slow the cycling in my opinion, because you're taking bacteria out. The reason I'm making that distinction is because that's usually what that question is for. People are afraid if they do a lot of water changes, are they taking all the bacteria out?
Should you not vacuum at that point if you're going through a cycle at the beginning? I'm a big believer in vacuuming, but when I don't.
I made that mistake once, though. Like I vacuumed too much and it sent a bloom through my whole tank.
I got a funny approach on this, Steve. My feeling is that the dirtier a tank is when it's cycling, the stronger the nitrification bed is.
Okay.
I had a tank once. I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I had a tank once. I couldn't get it to cycle. No matter what I did, I couldn't get it to cycle. I was throwing ammonia in. I was throwing all kinds of. I could not get this tank to cycle. I went to the fish market and I got a salmon carcass.
I know the dead shrimp. We've done that with
the head. Shrimp. The head of a big salmon, the head with the spine and the tail. I threw the whole thing in there. The tank smelled like low tide for like
I would have figured that one out.
Like 3 months. But it cycled really, really well.
I'm sure.
The whole house cycled.
People like David said, use shrimp. Like they'll put shrimp, a piece of fish in there, and I'm always leery about doing that. I'm sort of old-fashioned, but today things are different. When I first started my first saltwater tank is back in the 70s, and it literally took 2 to 3 months to cycle with everything.
Yeah.
Now today, between the live rock, the live sand, the last time I think I took less than a week to cycle my tank.
Well, we've learned now. Like we know so much more.
It's so different today. It's so different today.
Yeah.
But the waiting with that at the beginning years ago, that waiting before you could put fish in, like I said, months.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I mean, all we had was dead coral. We didn't really understand live rock.
Right. Bleached white.
Bleached coral.
Bleached coral. I take them out of my tank and bleach them every few months. I wanted them nice and white.
Oh man, we're dating ourselves, guys. So my opinion is the dirtier a tank is when it's cycling, the better. Then let's see. Can you use the same bacteria for fresh water and salt water? Basically, yes. But the answer to the question is, I'm assuming we're talking about nitrifying bacteria there. It's not all bacteria. It's also what they call archaea, which used to be classed as bacteria, but now it's not classed as bacteria anymore. The crazy thing about this is that you could literally go out to your garden. Man, I'm gonna get so many calls about this.
What am I going to my garden for tomorrow now?
I am gonna get so many calls about this. You could literally go out to your garden, take a tablespoon of soil from the garden and throw it in your tank, and you have introduced all the bacteria you need to cycle that tank.
Okay. Let me go get some dirt.
Fresh or salt water?
Salt water too, because it's archaea, which are all over, and the ones that are going to live in salt water better are going to thrive, and the nitrobacter.
I believe you, but I'm not going to the backyard and getting dirt.
Yeah, don't go to the backyard.
I believe it 100%.
But the reason I put it like that is to just talk about the fact that if you're putting any live rock in the tank, or you're doing a freshwater tank and you put in some gravel from another tank or a piece of wood from another tank or something, you've got all the bacteria you need. Sure. You just need to feed them to get them to grow, and they'll be fine.
I always try to move things over, like never start a tank clean, fresh with brand new stuff, And I always tell a joke. One time in work, I went into an apartment, and the lady had a fish tank empty. I said, "Why is the tank empty?" She goes, "Because fish keep dying." I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Every month I take it apart and clean it down Palmolive, and the fish die."
but they're shiny.
Yeah.
See, my
Oh,
tank
my
is
God.
clean. They still die. Okay.
But her hands are soft while she does this.
Yeah. And the
Yeah,
tank
yeah.
is clean.
That's
Her
another
match.
dated joke, right?
All right. So can I use regular tap water with your salt mix? Sure you can. I wouldn't, but you can if you want to.
I would.
Yeah, but
Um,
that also depends on where your water is. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't compare New York water to like Jersey water. The parts per million is so much higher in there. The CDS rather is so much higher. You'll get 350, 450 in there. We get dirty coming out of
Well,
our water.
plus your pipes. You don't know. Some
yeah.
people have old pipes.
One of the big things that people don't understand is silicates. If you're on town water, a lot of the municipalities, after the water is all filtered and everything's ready to go and it's ready to go out to the town, they actually add silicates to the water as it goes out to the town to protect the insides of the pipes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you can use tap water to make salt water. It is physically possible to do it. If you have a fish only tank, you might even get away with it. But in a reef tank, even though you can do it, I would never, ever try to run a reef tank on tap water, because if it's okay today, I might be killing everything tomorrow.
Yeah, and they changed that mixture going from municipality to municipality.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get that report from your local Department of Environmental Protection.
Yeah.
I found that out just for her.
And they're constantly using different compounds to filter the water, depending on what they find in the water. I had an entire reef system go down once because the town was using something to filter the water that they thought was non-toxic to humans, which it is, but it was toxic to my corals, and it was part of the filtering that they did. So yes, you can, but I don't recommend it, and I would never do it in a reef tank.
Well, even fluoride. I know that was big in the 80s, putting fluoride in the water.
Yeah, they do. Let's see. Do you have a tank set up? I already answered this. I got I have a 150 cichlid tank, which, by the way, if anybody is interested, I am looking to find a new home for my 150 cichlid tank. So give me a call or shoot me an email if somebody wants to come up to Massachusetts and get it. And we also have a mangrove tank. I have a little 29-gallon old Cardiff tank that I got a mangrove from Julian Sprong, and I've been playing with that mangrove tank. I've got some plans for it, but it's not doing what I want it to do yet. So I'm not even showing it or talking about it because it's not doing what I want it to do.
I could never get those mangroves to grow the way I want them to grow. I've been trying for years.
I learned a pretty important thing. My mangrove is coming back now, but Julian told me, because there's a lot of people, I have a red mangrove, and a lot of people say that you have to wipe
the leaves
because of the
salt, right? Yeah, the salt.
Julian, who in my mind is the ultimate mangrove
guru of mangrove,
right? So Julian, when I got this mangrove from him, I said, "Do I need to spray it and wipe the leaves?" He's like, "No, you don't need to do that. That's a bunch of hooey. It's actually not good to spray it because it makes mold on it. Don't spray it. Just leave it alone." Well, my mangrove kept going downhill. And I talked to Julian about it a couple of times. And Julian finally said to me, he said, "I got a guy up north that says he sprays his mangrove and it makes it do better. So maybe you should try that." So I started spraying the mangrove, and the mangrove is coming back now big time.
Wow.
So I think that in Julian's very humid Florida environment,
that's true too.
You don't need to spray the mangrove.
Yes.
But up here in Massachusetts,
cold,
in my dry, cold house,
right,
I got to spray that thing to give it the moisture that it needs.
Right,
and
makes sense.
It's coming back. It's starting to look beautiful now.
Yeah, because we're running radiators in the summertime and forced heat.
You know what? It's the same way in Florida with orchids. I've seen like my aunt's house in orchids. She has orchids there. She doesn't do anything but mist them every couple of weeks. She doesn't water them because it's so humid out in Illinois.
Yeah,
my wife has them. My wife might put ice cubes in them, sprays them, and all that. It's like you said, different climate, different
climate. So Dee and Steve, that runs through all the questions you got me beforehand. Did anybody give you any other questions during that we need to answer?
No, the only question I got was from Bill Amelli, and he said water changes overcrowding affect ammonia quality of freshwater and saltwater aquariums, and that's pretty much generating more ammonia is going to generate poor water conditions. But
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a reef tank, there's a lot of stuff to take up ammonia. In a freshwater, there's not as much to take the ammonia up. The advantage of the freshwater is that you're generally running a lower pH, so most of your ammonia is going to be ammonium, and so it's not as toxic. It's actually one of the biggest differences between freshwater and saltwater is the toxicity of the ammonia in relation to the pH, because we run at such different pHs. But I'm not sure I actually 100% understood what he was asking.
yeah. But anyway, I am going to go into the share screen so I can pull up the big wheel. As you guys have been following us from the beginning of the show, you'll see that we have been collecting the entries for the big giveaway, which is the pro grade test kit. If I can pull up this picture, I've got like all thumbs here today. But anyway, all right, I'm going to pull up that in the background. The pro test kit. I'm going to remove you, remove me. And you can see that that is the pro test kit. I'm
Between
bringing
the
you
pro
back,
kit and the
Steve.
regular kit, then is it just more accurate, or
It's tighter parameters. So with the, I think it's, I don't remember. I think it's 0.02.
Well, let me go into my the Price is Right schmeal.
All right, you do it. You do it, D.
So the NO2 and NO3 Pro test kit. This test kit is it's capable of performing over 50 tests. One test kit test for nitrate, which is the byproduct at the end of the nitrification process and affects water quality. The nitrite, which is the toxic aspect to fish and is produced in the first stage of the bacterial process. The NO2, NO3 Pro test kit will help you maintain a healthy and stable aquarium. Brought to you by our friends at Tropic Marine. And
There
this
you go.
too can be yours if the price is right. But anyway, trying to give back. Once again, we always say thank you to our sponsors, Tropic Marine, and Lou is always a friend of the Brooklyn Aquarium Society here.
yes, he is.
I am going to pull this screen up if I remember what I'm doing and hit the sound here so we can get the special effect treatment here. All right.
I always thank you always for stick coming through with us and wasting his Friday night here. And
No, it's fun.
I guess we all have nothing better to do on a Friday night.
He'd be much happier throwing that old salmon into the corner and done the house up.
I'm never gonna live that one down, huh?
So now we got 23 entries. If you didn't get in on time, you're gonna have to wait for the next one. And if you guys look closely, there's also a mystery entrance for our item of pin plaques. Our pin plaque sponsors, given to me by the great G Bostic, is a beautiful hand-painted coral insert, which is a great focal point for any aquarium. This colorful piece produced by Scenery and shelter for swimming obstacles within your aquarium, brought to us by our friends at Pinplax. Okay, I'm not Bill Bob
Want me to spin
Barker,
it?
that's for sure. Yeah, let's spin the wheel. I'm gonna spin the wheel. Round and round it goes. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm taking the hand off so you guys don't think it's rigged. All right, so
Put your hands up in the air, David.
KJE. Put my hand up in the air. I got nothing up my sleeves yet. All right, so KJE Aquatics, you are winner of one. I'm gonna spin this a couple more times. Now I'm gonna put down in the comments the email address. You can email me to claim your prize. Actually, go on the Facebook page. I'll make a little comment section for you guys on the Facebook page, and it'll just be a note to address that you won. I got your name here, so we'll know. Or you could email me at dfrombrooklyn@gmail. So that's easier said. And I'm going to spin it. I'm going to take this choice off the wheel, and I'm going to spin it again. All right. I am putting my hands up in there. Look. Oh, Mr. Fox. John Fox. I had to go by his house and see some of those black Moscow guppies he's been breeding over there. But Mr. Fox is also a longtime member of the Brooklyn Aquarium Society. So congratulations, Mr. Fox.
D, what's really funny is, Leslie, my wife, and I, we bring Tropic Marin into the country from Germany, but we also bring in Dr. Basilier's biofish food from Germany, and KJE Aquatics. Keith is one of our customers.
And he's always at our talks, so we love to see him at the talks.
That's awesome.
He got some great questions here too. That was one thing I missed too. That German, the expo out there. Oh my God, I wanted to make it. Let me see. Let me spin the wheel one more time. I took him off of there, so we don't have one guy winning like 2-3 times. All right.
Man, look at how you guys are set up here, huh?
Round and round it goes. Producer Reef. Producer Reef, congratulations. Also, another loyal follower and subscriber of our YouTube channel. If you guys are not already subscribed to the Brooklyn Aquarium Society YouTube channel, well, kick yourself in the pants because I'm going to throw your name in the garbage. But anyway, make sure you've subscribed so that you can take part in not only our monthly presentations, but any and all giveaways that we come up with. Now, I'm going to spin it one more time because Steve's going to have a heart attack if I give anything else over here without doing it through the website. So I'm going to spin it one more time.
Go ahead.
And we will be offering more of these test kits at our other presentations and auctions and so on and so forth. So stay tuned. Robert Poorman, congratulations to Robert. Once again, you can drop me email, dfrombrooklyn@gmail.com. I'm taking your names down. And it's awesome, man. I should have put my name on there. I'm going to tell you the God's honest truth. I can't say it enough. I don't care how digital we get. I still like to go with the hand test kit. Gives me the most comfortable feeling that I have the result that I know is accurate, because the tests, we can get lulled into a blind confidence relying on all the digital technology.
I think it's good to it's fine as long as you're testing it against a test kit once in a while.
Okay. I mean, we get kind of old. It's kind of hard to see the colors. We rely on those digital probes, because sometimes blue and purple is like, is it purple? Is it blue? I don't know. But
I know you got to watch, but just when something's easier, you'll do it more. When something is hard, there's a couple of good brands of test kits that, again, I won't stop mentioning brands that they're good, but some of them get a little complicated. They're too many steps, and so what you do is you just go, I'm not going to do it today.
Hey, Mr. Bernard said, "What? Steve didn't win?"
No, I didn't put my name in. I don't know why. I don't want that. I didn't put my name in.
Congratulations to the winner. Yeah. Congratulations to the winner. But once again, I can't thank Lou enough, man. We were supposed to have you on in September, and everything went kind of
apologize to your wife. We took her Friday night away.
We took a Friday night. Wine and cheese for the wife.
Our wives are used to it.
That's all right. This worked out great.
Wine and cheese for the wives out there. Yeah. Anybody willing to deal with crazy fish nuts, dead fish in the house and throwing stuff in the bathtub and changing water and in the middle of the living room and stuff. They're a rare and precious breed. So
I agree.
With that, I will draw the night to a conclusion. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Gene, who kicked himself off somewhere down the road. And if anybody has anything else to say it now. If not, we're gonna go to what we call the outro.
Take care, Lou.
Take care, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.